What's going on, YouTube? We're back at it for another video, and today we've got a very simple and very powerful build for the Witch that's going to end up just fully revolving around the one skill that is Bonestorm. It's going to be a one-click wonder right here. Now, the one thing that is the negative aspect to Bonestorm is the time that it'll take to actually channel Bonestorm before you can actually fire it off, but thankfully we've got a capability of mitigating this issue, actually increasing the channel time to make this thing spam out extremely fast through just adding additional projectiles to this and casting speed. But with this, we'll be able to just one-shot entire packs. We'll be able to one-shot entire packs of blues as well. Sometimes even yellows will just get completely one-shot depending on how many bone shards hit them. And at that same point, we've got an absolute boss melter right here. We'll be bringing them down to their knees very quickly as well with how much stun damage this has, and we'll be able to increase that as well. And sometimes, by the time you bring them down to their knees, before they can even get up, you may be able to finish off those boss units. So this one's going to make a lot of the content very easy, and we're not even at its full power level, as we will be able to further increase the damage output from this later on. So it will end up going all the way into endgame, and I will be updating this in the coming future. But that being said, we've got more than a few things to cover, so let's get straight into it. Now, starting off first, when it comes down to the skill tree, there's three things we're really going to be looking for, and that's going to be physical damage, critical hit chance, as much as we can possibly get. We're trying to get to the point where we've got 100% critical hit chance with every single channel of Bonestorm, and on top of that, we want as much critical strike damage just to amplify that damage as much as possible. But let's make this simple and just go through the clusters you'll really need. Starting off with Jagged Shards, one of the first things we'll want to grab up for that critical hit chance and more of that physical damage. Heading up over to the right from that point, we'll want to grab the cluster over here for Potent Incantation, further increasing our spell damage by a 60% increase. Now, we will reduce our cast speed by 5%, but we'll be able to mitigate that later on. Now, heading over to the right from there, we'll want to grab over here Critical Exploit, gaining every one of these nodes, getting a 15% increase to our critical strike damage, as well as a 55% increase to our critical strike chance. Heading over to the left from that point, we'll be going over to this triangle cluster over here, grabbing up Leaping Ambush, giving us a 100% increase to our critical hit chance against enemies of full life. This is something that's going to capitalize on those moments of trying to guarantee that critical hit on any one of the enemies, especially the larger packs of trash mobs, giving us those one-shot moments of just clearing through those packs, the blue packs, and even yellows at certain times. On top of that, we'll be going up towards the top point for Direct Approach, giving us another 40% increase to that critical strike chance against enemies that are affected by no elemental ailments. We're only using Bonestorm, and the only ailment we're affecting them with is going to be bleeding. Now, one thing that I will note about this, if you are playing with friends, especially friends that do have elemental ailments, they will be applying these to enemies, and this critical hit chance right here for both of these nodes will probably be a whole lot less useful for you. So you may end up wanting to pull these points out if you're playing in co-op with some friends, and then just slot them over here in the middle, going for the critical overload so you can get the 15% increase to your critical hit chance for spells, and a bit more spell damage after you critically hit recently. But from that point, we'll head up to the north and get the real meat of the damage for the actual Bonestorm itself, with the physical damage up here and the chance to inflict bleeding on hit, as well as a bit more of that critical hit chance, critical spell damage bonus, and increasing the magnitude of our bleeding with any time that we actually inflict it with critical hits. And over to the right, we've got even more of that bleeding damage, that physical damage, as well as being able to break the armor on critical hits with the spell, equal to 10% of our physical damage. And with how much critical strike damage we have with this, that damage to the, or breaking armor with that 10% of physical damage can be into the larger numbers of just reducing their overall armor, and the armor is the only thing that gives them physical resistance. So we're reducing their resistance, so each time that we're hitting with critical hits, we're further increasing our overall DPS output towards those enemy units as we keep striking them. That's what ends up giving this a bit more of that melting power, especially against boss units and some of those yellow elites that are pretty tanky. Heading south of that location, we'll grab up this little 4 cluster right here with Sudden Escalation, giving us a bit more of that critical hit chance, also increasing our casting speed after we've recently critically hit, as well as getting a bit more of that spell damage bonus and even more of that critical hit chance. But from that point, heading up north, we need to grab up an important node, which is going to be Controlling Magic, giving us another 25% increase to our critical hit chance with spells, but also hits against us have a 25% reduced critical hit chance, so this is giving us a bit more of that survivability and DPS at the same time. Now, I would suggest also grabbing up the Ingenuity. Goodness, I'm telling you right now, dyslexia or whatever, illiteracy is hitting me hard right now. But 25 intelligence, you can't go wrong with grabbing that one up, especially when it comes down to leveling up those skill gems. You definitely want to grab this one up. But just south of that, we'll also grab up the node that is the Whispers of Doom, which can apply an additional curse, double activation delay of curses. We will not be activating any one of the curses. We'll actually be putting this into Blasphemy, a persistent on us, and using our spirit to basically have an aura of 2 different curses going on enemies that we walk towards. And we will be increasing the area of effect with this, heading down south right here for zone control, 40% increase to our area of effect of curses, and the increase to the effect of it by 8%, but also reducing the movement speed of any one of the enemies that we actually do curse by a 15%. And within these curses, we will be doing vulnerability and temporal chains, so not only are we slowing it by 15%, but we'll have another 28% slow on them, as well as decreasing their overall total armor and being able to ignore that armor, basically giving us a massive increase to our overall damage output towards those units by decreasing their overall physical resistance by ignoring that armor. So it's going to be a win-win for us. Now, when it comes down to the updates I'll be doing in the future, we will want to keep progressing down this northern portion over here until we get to the Tempered Mind, gaining another critical strike damage bonus and even more of that physical damage. But just south of that, when we get to the cherry on top with how much damage we're going to be getting, is these 2 little diamonds over here, and we will be increasing our total damage output by another 70%. If we've dealt a critical hit in the past 8 seconds, which, trust me, with everything that we already have on the board right now, it is not hard for us to critically hit, and it is going to be a massive powerhouse by the time we get over here. So it will get even more powerful as we go through into endgame and get deeper into the maps portion towards some of those uber bosses. Now, when it comes down to the Ascendancy, you could do this on Infernalist, but I believe Bloodmage may be the better option, as we will be able to further increase our critical damage bonus from this, and it further increases our survivability, as we will be able to utilize Life Leech with this when every one of our spells is giving us a 10% back. I mean, pretty much every time that I strike enemies, I'm gaining every bit of my health back, and I'll be able to overheal with the Sanguine Mancy, with the Sanguine Massy or Sanguine Massy. I don't even know how to say this, but honestly, if you've gone the route of going Blood Mage and you haven't got to the point where you have a good bit of critical hit damage, or you don't have the one-shotting capability, I would not put your nodes into this just yet. I would only grab up the 3% increased maximum life, but later on, when I finally do get the other 4 points that I'm missing right now, I will be going for Gore Spike and then heading down over here to the right for Crimson Power, getting Energy Shield from my equipped body armor as extra maximum life. That way my total maximum life can be even higher, so I can have a massive increase to my critical damage bonus per 40 life. I'm just trying to maximize it as much as possible, so the power with this build is just going to go up from here, and it hasn't even gotten to its full fleshed out capabilities just yet. And I will be doing an update to this skill tree in the future, but for the time being, hit that subscribe button, as we'll have that coming later on. But now let's head over to the skills that we'll need to use and some of the gear that'll be important for this build. And when it comes down to the skills, obviously our number one that we're going to be using is going to be Bonestorm, and the supporting gems that we'll need for this, the first one is very important. Scattershot is actually going to be the one that ends up decreasing our time that we need to actually channel this, and gives us an even better opportunity at just spamming this one out there and getting to that maximum bone shards above us as fast as possible. Now, it will reduce our cast speed by 20%. We will be able to mitigate this, but the 2 additional projectiles is the reason it ends up reducing the actual time that we'll need to channel this, as each time that we're clicking this button, instead of just 1 shard at a time coming in, we're getting 3 shards at a time. So that's what ends up reducing the total time that it gets, or that it takes, in order to get the full amount of those bone shards ready to fire off, and it is going to be extremely powerful, and we'll be spamming this off pretty quickly. Now, right next to that, we'll be grabbing up Brutality for a bit more of that physical damage, just further increasing that DPS output, and since we're not using Chaos or Elemental damage, there's no worries there. And just after that, Arcane Tempo is going to give us that 25% increase to cast speed, giving us an even further capability of just spamming this out there and getting as much damage out as possible. Now, when it comes down to boss fights, if you want, you can end up just throwing in Overpowered. This is actually something that I slot in every single time, just to guarantee that I'm bringing those bosses down to their knees as quickly as possible, and it is very noticeable. This sometimes can be the only thing that we need. in order to actually finish off a boss as fast as possible instead of using the arcane tempo, as if we're able to get that boss down to his knees, he's an easy target and we don't have to worry about how long it's going to take to actually get that next one off. With the increase to the projectiles from Scattershot, we've got all the casting speed that we really need, and we can get even more casting speed from a bit of our gear to help out with those moments as well. But getting them down to their knees and not having to deal with some of their aggro tactics that they may have and just being able to finish them off right there is sometimes the only thing that we need to make this as efficient as possible at taking out some of those bosses. And later on, when it comes down to Bonestorm, we will be applying even more damage with certain skill points that I just don't have the room for just yet. Right now, this is the best when it comes down to utilizing this low level before we get the 4th and 5th slot, but we can increase the damage of this by another maximum 35%, and then we'll eventually just be able to put in Overpower and be able to just literally overpower large groups of enemies. Anytime we see a yellow, we're pushing them all the way back, putting them down on their knees, and making them very easy if we don't even just one-shot them from that first hit. And then when it comes down to our second skill, we'll be using Blasphemy, which is going to give us the capability of socketing curses into this that just apply an aura around me. You'll notice in the center I've got the purple and red little markings circling around me. That's going to be both of the curses, and we'll be using Vulnerability and Temporal Chains. Now, Temporal Chains is at a higher level that you may not be already at, and if you don't have this one just yet, or even if you don't have the spirit to add Temporal Chains in, don't even worry about it. It's just something that's going to end up slowing those units and giving us a little bit of breathing room from some of those units that just bum rush and try to get into our face. But overall, Vulnerability is going to be the number one for us, giving us even more of that one-shotting capability by ignoring 6,465 armor, giving us that further reduced physical protection from some of those enemy units, and giving our maximum increase to damage that we can apply to them. But if you don't have Temporal Chains, or you're not at the high enough level to actually access this one yet through the skill gems, I would say Enfeeble is going to be a great option, as that one, anytime that it applies the curse to any of the enemies around you, it'll reduce the damage they're able to deal towards you. We're not really worried too much about getting dealt damage since we are just kind of melting through the crowds, but anytime that you occasionally do take 1 or 2 hits, that will end up giving you a better chance of survivability from some of those hits that may be a bit larger, especially if you're not really paying attention and you're just rolling on through sometimes. Next thing you know, you might get hit by a stray swing, and then, who knows, that may be the one shot that it takes. It's happened to the best of us. And when it comes down to the gear, when it comes to our wand and our focus, we are looking to just get an increase to our spell physical damage, critical spell damage bonus, as well as +4 to the physical spell skills. Now that's going to generally be on a wand, and this one will probably be the cheapest option. We also would like to have casting speed and critical hit chance, but both of those attributes are going to be very pricey if you're looking to go onto the PoE trade market and try to find some of that pinnacle gear. But for the time being, without the casting speed and the critical hit chance, we should be doing just fine. We can get that critical hit chance off of certain other items, but if you can find it for cheap, do buy it up. It will be well worthwhile. And when it comes down to the focus, it's the same thing. Spell damage, spell physical damage. You can get that critical hit chance for spells. Do try and find that. But overall, just increasing our damage output is going to be the number one thing that really benefits us in the early portion of the end game, and then being able to push in, grab up some of that currency, and then get that pinnacle gear later on. Now, one unique that will be well worth our while is going to be the Snake Pit Ring. Not only is this going to increase our cast speed and some of our spell damage, and I found one of the low versions of this, these rolls can be a good bit higher. But the big thing about this is slotting it into the right ring slot, we'll be able to gain projectiles from spell chain +1 time. This means we'll have moments where our bone shards will not only hit the enemy in front of us, but it'll just bounce back in different directions, basically ricochet off that guy and then hit another guy with the same amount of damage, which this is going to be very noticeable, especially when mulching through some of those crowds, and this will give you the capability of not having to use something like Pierce for just clearing through some of those trash mobs. Now, if you don't have this ring, as this can be a costly ring, upwards of 8 or more of the Exalted Orbs, I got this one for 6, and this was the cheapest one I could find. But if you don't have this ring, you could take out Arcane Tempo and just put in Pierce, and you'll have the same level of clearing power. It'll just be a little bit slower. But later on, once you do end up getting the Snake Pit, it's going to be worth it, and it's going to make this a very powerful build at just moving through some of that content, especially when it comes down to clearing maps. Beyond that, when it comes down to the helmet, this is another chance for us to gain a little bit more of that critical hit chance, and do be mindful that you really want to get as much maximum life and as much resistance as you possibly can. Attributes to intelligence, strength are going to be worthwhile, especially if you're in the Bloodmage category. Strength is going to further increase your total maximum life, and intelligence is going to increase that overall damage output. But when it comes down to the rest of the gear, honestly, the number one things are going to be maximum life, resistances, a little bit of armor and energy shield, maybe a little bit of life on hit with the gloves, and the number one thing with the boots is always movement speed. Movement speed and resistances are the number one thing you want with any pair of boots that you can possibly find. 30% increase to movement speed, I believe, is the max, and that is going to be the absolute best roll you're wanting to look for. And I'd say that's going to be worthwhile, even if it has some low resistances on it. You can kind of make up for that with other things, as movement is life in this game, and it will benefit you a lot more than some of the resistances sometimes, as being able to dodge some of those projectiles in certain cases while just moving may end up being much better than just taking the actual hit and then sustaining that damage, as some things, as a slow projectile just moving through you, can still end up killing you, whereas that movement speed might have pulled you out of that situation. But the last thing to note about this is definitely when it comes down to the necklace or the body armor, gaining a little bit of spirit off one of these items is going to benefit you, as we will need 120 total spirit to have both of these curses as an aura around us. That's about the only thing that we'd be looking for specifically for both the amulet and the chest piece, besides the resistances or possibly an increase to critical strike damage with the necklace that gives us a bit more of that damage output. But that's going to be the build right there, guys. We'll be updating this in the coming future. I'll be diving into endgame with this and further fleshing this one out, getting some of that pinnacle gear and just maximizing what you'll really need to have this at the fullest capability of maximum damage output when we get to the uber bosses, when we get into mapping. And I'm pretty excited to see how this goes. I'm pretty sure this should have a very strong survivability, and at that same point, it's just going to be one-shotting just about everything we move through, and hopefully, by the time I have this all the way maxed out with its total damage, we will be just deleting bosses in just a few hits, if not just bringing them to their knees in 2 hits, and then just finishing them off with 2 more right after that. I wouldn't mind seeing that one. But the bigger the target, the more bone shards go in, and the more damage we're dealing. But hopefully this has helped you out, and if you got any ideas for increasing this one in the coming future, or any type of ideas that may enhance this build, let me know down in the comments below. I'm all ears. I'd love to hear some of the comments from other people, or what you've got going on your skill tree that may end up benefiting this build even more so. But on that note, if you'd like to see more content like this in the future, hit that subscribe button. And if you'd like to see some of this content live, hit that link down in the description. Follow me over at Twitch. We'll be streaming. And on that note, have a good one.